Hello, everyone. It's been a while, but I'm finally back, and I'm starting a new project. I'm still working on that Mech Mercenary thing that I posted about a while ago. That's my big project that I've been working on. But in the meantime, I've been practicing 3D modeling a lot, and I decided what I'm going to do is where I live in Pittsburgh, there's a showcase in every year around Halloween and basically a thing for like indie devs or whatever to go and show off whatever they're working on. Pretty small thing from my understanding. I've only gone 1 year and I've never actually shown anything. But this year I decided to make a project. So last like Wednesday or Thursday evening, I put together a small design document for a space game. It's essentially going to be like a twin stick shooter, maybe kind of maybe a little closer to like something like Asteroids. I want there to be some minimal like Newtonian physics or whatever. So you have to I'm not 100% on how I'm going to handle it, but I think it's going to be like you'll have like a gas and a brake kind of situation. So there'll be like drifting and then like aiming your starship or fighter or whatever towards enemies and just kind of, drifting around space like that. The real gimmick is going to be that I want it to be kind of like if anyone played that old game Spore, the cell stage, when you play as this little cell at first, and then as you eat things, you get bigger, and the whole time you can see bigger creatures below you, and you're in control of like just the XY axis. It's like 2D, but as you get bigger, the huge cells in the background come to the foreground, and the ones in the on the level that you're at, they get smaller. So I kind of want to do that, but with a space game. So you'll start out as like a fighter, and then as you're flying around, you'll primarily be dealing with other fighters. But underneath you, you'll be able to see like the big frigates and things like that. And then when you later upgrade to a frigate, the camera will zoom out and you'll still be able to see the fighters buzzing around, but they'll all look super tiny on the screen. Your frigate will take up a lot less of the screen than it did when you were a fighter, and you'll be able to see the capital ships below them, which will be even bigger. And then I want there to be like, this is essentially going to be a first pass at the random contract generation that my mech game is going to have. So I want this to be somewhat reusable code. So it's still going to be the same kind of idea. There will be a turn-based overworld map. There'll be factions, and then they'll generate simple contracts for you. You'll go on the contracts; those will play out in real-time battles, and that'll be like the twin-stick shooter phase. And then when you come out of the shooter, you'll get paid for your service, depending on what the mission was or whatever. Getting paid per kill or something like that, per ship that you shoot down. And then you'll use that to hire more fighters and stuff or upgrade to a frigate, that kind of thing. It's not going to be super, super complex the way that the Mech Mercenary game that I'm working on is going to be, but it's just going to kind of be, a meta game on top of the shooter thing. But overall, it's a pretty simple idea. And the most important thing is since it's a space game with ships and stuff, there isn't going to be a lot of animation that I have to do. Animation is by far where I'm the weakest when it comes to creating assets. Um, Even with sound and music and stuff, I'm at least somewhat passable. So for sound effects and stuff, I'm probably just going to use like some of those game jam tools that are out. I'll cover those in a later video if anyone's not familiar. Uh, but yeah, so I'm going to be kind of quick and dirty with sound effects. This is mostly a project to just kind of force me to have a deadline. and forced me to sit down and, work. And because, when you don't have a deadline, you just kind of reach an analysis paralysis, as they say, so to speak. Me, especially without any kind of structure, I have a tendency to just research forever and just practice and mess around and not make any like real progress. So, giving myself a deadline. This showcase, I think it's usually like the Friday before Halloween, and so I think that would give me about like 8 or 9 weeks from when I first started this project. I'm pretty comfortable with Blender now with 3D modeling. That's what I've been doing for the most part, is just practicing that since my last devlog for the Mech Mercenary game. Um, but in all that time, I never got around to texturing. So in this time lapse here, you'll see me messing around and redoing things over and over and over again because I have like no clue what I'm doing with textures. But in this time lapse, you'll see me going from nothing all the way up through finishing the first little flying saucer enemy. Not sure that it'll be an enemy. Maybe it'll just be another type of fighter that you can purchase or something. But you'll see me take it from nothingness to concept through texturing all the way to importing it into Unreal. I haven't finished that pipeline ever, so on top of the texturing, importing it into Unreal, that's all like pretty new to me. I've imported 3D models that I've created before, but nothing like too crazy. I think I had a video a while ago where I was just kind of messing around with like wrapping pixel art around 3D models, but they were extremely simple. Um, so this is the first time I'm going with not just albedo textures, but I'm working on bump mapping. I played around with normal mapping, ambient occlusion baking, all that kind of stuff. I got it to a point where I'm mostly happy with it. I'm probably going to end up redoing some of it because there's already things that I noticed that did not come out quite right, namely with the bump mapping. As you'll see here, I'm working with a mirror modifier, so I only needed to texture half of it and then the other half would copy over. But there's some weird like artifacting that goes on with when you have a bump map that goes up to the edge of a mirror modifier. At certain angles, you can kind of see a line. We're not quite to that in the time lapse, but eventually you'll see it. I'll try and call it out when I see it. Of course, I'm moving at 20x time. So I have it was maybe like 5 or 6 hours of footage, and then on top of that, I probably had like one evening, so maybe like 3 or 4 hours of where I was just doing like research, reading documentation, and watching like tutorial videos and stuff to figure out shit that I was doing wrong. A good portion of that was because I kept screwing up the normal maps. And in the end, I found out that I was actually doing it correct, but it wasn't a normal map that I needed for my situation. I needed a bump map, which at the time I didn't even realize that they were different, but they are. And funnily enough, they're handled very, very differently in Blender versus Unreal. So the very last video in this, you'll see this exported into Unreal. Uh, but I kind of screwed up and the footage wasn't really like there. I don't know if it got corrupted or what, or if I like forgot to hit play on my recorder. So you'll see everything going up through me channel packing the textures. I used Krita to do that. And but as far as importing the textures into Unreal and setting up the material to read them properly, that just kind of skips right over, and then you'll see like the finished project. But with all that said, I did get the entire pipeline finished, the entire workflow. So I think going forward, the next models that I do, it's just going to be a lot of repetition, banging them out. I'll probably do, I don't know, maybe more time lapses of those kinds of things. And just, I don't know, maybe a little voiceover like I'm doing now to explain what's going on. I haven't decided how many fighters, frigates, and capital ships I'm gonna have. I might even make there be like 4 layers. Maybe stick like corvettes in there too. Um, but that I don't know. I don't know if there's enough of a difference between corvettes and fighters to justify having like a separate layer, a separate z-axis. Um, so I think once I finish probably 1 or 2 fighters, probably 2 fighters, and then one more frigate, 1 or more frigates. I'll put together like a very basic gameplay demo, just to visualize what I'm talking about here with the cell stage. It's a pretty old game. It was a popular game, but I don't know if modern audiences are gonna be super familiar with it, especially since the cell stage that I'm referring to is it's kind of it was only like 15 minutes of the actual game. Like it was a very interesting concept, and I wished that it was done better or at least longer. And then I was kind of surprised to see that no game ever aped that. So I'm hoping to do something with that. It's a little gimmicky, but it's kind of cool. It's a neat effect. So I can't wait to show it. More than anything, I'm excited to get to coding again. I've been doing 3D modeling so long that it's just I want to get back to what I'm good at, which is programming. It's what I do for a living, and it's what I do. It's what I like to do in my spare time. But without having any assets and without having anyone else to create them for me, it's just kind of all me here. But it has been an interesting experience learning how to do all this stuff. Like right now, what you're seeing down in the left is I was like, I don't need a 2K texture for this. And in all the tutorials I saw, they were like, start with high res. You can always lower the resolution later. And I was like, I want to see what happens. Why can't I work in a 1K texture? And well, when you try and fill in things like this with the fill tool in Blender, you start to get little artifacting on the edges if you don't have a high enough resolution. I tried increasing the buffer size between the islands, and for some reason it still wasn't working. It was really quick, but when you saw me messing around with those textures down and left, like just manually editing them, um, you could see that there was like a several pixel buffer, but for some reason, things with like tight angles with uh, very small UV areas just didn't really cooperate. So I had to go right back up to the 2K texture that I was originally working on. And if you've been paying attention to this time lapse, you'll see that I redid this texture like I lost track of how many times, probably like 10. And and then on top of that, I'm trying to do like bump maps and uh texture overlays and noise textures and stuff. All of this, like, I'm pretty familiar with in Unreal, but I've never done in Blender before. So yeah, there was a lot of trial and error, a lot of mistakes, and I just had to rework multiple times. But one little trick that I did work out for my workflow was, if you start with a low poly and then, because like most of the stuff I've seen, they're like, oh, start with high poly. That's usually for sculpting though. I'm not sure what professionals do for like a low poly workflow, like I'm going with. But I started with the low poly, and then since I can't draw for shit, I was like, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll just use the masking feature of the texture painting in Blender, and then I'll just, like highlight what I want and then just use the paint bucket tool to fill it in. And that worked really well, but that means that you have to have geometry with faces that you can highlight in order to get down to, the design that you want to do. What I ended up doing was I started with a low poly and I unwrapped it. And then once I was finished unwrapping it, then I created a high poly without editing the shape too much. I mostly just subdivided faces so that I could make neat little alien looking designs on it. Oh, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but that little circle in the middle there, if you keep your eye on it, at certain angles, you'll see what I mean about the artifacting with the bump map. You can see like a line split right down the middle, and that's where the texture meets. But if you look at it straight on, you can't see it at all. So I think that when the renderer is trying to figure out like how to render the bumps, it doesn't quite know how to handle it when they like bump up each other in like a mirror. So yeah, it got a little weird, and then that carried over into Unreal. So I'll either need, I'm not quite sure how to do that. I might just avoid putting bump maps right by the mirror, or I'll just, apply the mirror modifier and then unwrap it without any modifiers on it. And then that would get away from that. But it would mean that I would have half the resolution at that point. Right now you'll see this is where you're doing something called channel packing. So you don't want to have a million different 2K textures. Since you only need black and white data for things like bump maps and shadow maps, ambient occlusion, specular shaders, all that kind of stuff, you really only need black and white data. So you don't need like a full res texture. So what you do is you start with the full res texture. Oh, and there it is. So let's slow that down. Oops. Damn it. Okay, I'm gonna keeps. All right, just a moment. Okay, there we go. Got it slowed down. So this is after I imported it into Unreal. I got all my emission shaders set up, and this is a dynamic sky blueprint that I had from a tutorial I did on Udemy. But this is what it looks like in Unreal. I'm happy with the way it came out. But this particular model, I messed up the low poly texture, so I had to import the high poly texture. It's still not like a ton of polygons, but for in a game where you're only flying around from a distant view, especially since this is a fighter, it's probably overkill. But yeah, in order to fix it, I'm gonna have to kind of like re-unwrap the low poly one again, and yeah, that's gonna be annoying because I'm gonna have to redo the texture completely again. Emission shaders, absolutely everything. But that's it. That's the whole update. I have about this is around Halloween, so about 2 months to finish this project, and yeah, I'm going to be giving fairly frequent updates in that time. But look out for that. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you in the next one.